Welcome back to Deep Thoughts, ladies and gentlemen. Today is September 11th. And for those of you who want to know about the show that covers this day, the episode's called That Day. Go back and take a look at it. Or go to deepthoughtsradio.com, click on the search field, and type in That Day. But today we're going to talk about something else as a result of a conversation I had with a friend of mine who said, I've listened to your episodes about the Mandela Effect, but I can't remember you really saying about what might cause it. And I thought that was a very intriguing, brilliant question, because we're going to speculate, of course. But I'm going to hit you with probably something you're not expecting. What are people going to expect someone like me to say about why the Mandela Effect occurs? Well, if you've done your research, even on the most basic part of the conspiracy, it has to do with the CERN Hadron Collider, the biggest machine that man has ever built. Huge. I think the diameter of it's like 10 kilometers. It borders 2 different countries. Its disclosed design is it has 4 major colliders and 4 minor colliders. Each collider has assigned to it various tasks that it's supposed to perform with the data that it's getting. What's interesting about it is it's still the same theory of what's going on, but you still have to take their word for what's actually taking place. What is the theory? Well, it is a gigantic circle in the ground that has 2 concentric circles inside that. It would be if you took the number 6 and you drew it inside of itself, say 3 times with a smaller body each time, right? So you draw the number 6 and you trace over the outside arc and you put it, something like that, When it was first turned on, it accelerated up to a particular speed and then would collide 2 protons together. And when these protons collide, theoretically, held in place by electromagnetic fields as they accelerate using electromagnetic sort of railgun technology, as I understand it. As soon as they slam into each other, these 2 protons burst, of course, shattering what I would call the ethereal mass that's inside them, thus releasing the smaller ethereal clusters inside, spherical, and they fly through a bunch of sensors that are put up like pancakes or pizzas all in a big row. And because this mass is so teeny tiny, it goes right through all of the fabric of these sensors. And the sensors are using, I believe, a Sigma 6 algorithm to filter noise versus actual mass that is more clumpy and thus can be tracked from one sensor to another, and then they draw a 3-dimensional imprint of the collision. But very soon after they turned it on, they had one of the elements, pretty much part of the outer ring as I understand it, got really hot and melted down, and they had to do a huge retrofit to a big part of the circle. I kind of, through the pictures, I don't remember anyone actually drawing a graph of or a diagram of what part of it went wrong. If it was a 360-degree circle, which it is, I'd say maybe like 30 degrees at most got damaged. I bet it's closer to 10, but it's extremely expensive. It just drained Europe of a ton of money, billions and billions of euros. The breakdown internally is that you have 3,000 scientists, 7,000 construction people, totaling around 10,000 people who roughly at one point or another worked on this thing. Of course, those numbers get in my head from one article and they could be incorrect, or they could be way higher by this point. So there was a point where they said, okay, the goal of this thing is to accelerate it faster and faster and faster. The rationale for building this device and running it was to find what's called the Higgs boson particle. Boson being dead, Higgs still being alive and really old. All of the science of this ridiculous particle that they're looking for which they've automatically embedded in a bunch of pseudoscience crap that you hear about, is 50 to 60 years old. The amount of differential between our subatomic theories between 60 years ago and today is almost as if you could burn the books from the past and come up with brand new definitions of the universe. But it's a story. It's something to tell the people. It's something to tell the financiers who don't understand a lick of what's being said. They tell them how important it would be to find the Higgs boson particle because it will let us know if we're in a multiverse or in a single verse. One being extremely stable, meaning the vibration of this Higgs boson particle would be very, very stable, wouldn't wiggle much, which is an absurd concept when you think about the fabric of the universe being extremely water-like and fluid, aka ether. And then you go up to the multiverse where it's vibrating a lot more, thus providing the theoretical model to host several universes on top of the one that you're currently recognizing. Very popularized in shows like Star Trek, which usually cannibalize sort of, scientific theories and then embed it in the show, which is a brilliant thing to do because it's science fiction, right? Things like Dyson spheres, wormholes, black holes, quasars, neutron stars, all this stuff is kind of validated indirectly through science fiction shows. They're not attempting to tell you it's 100% correct. They're just using it to create a story. That's it. It's the people on the outside that tell you that it's all correct and there is no other way that start to sound like the people who put people in house prison for saying that things were different than what was currently believed. So by 2013, they had reached the faster collision rate. And this is when a remarkable moment happened for some folks where the population split into two groups. A group of people that believe that Nelson Mandela died in 2013, which is what I remember. And then the group of people that believed he died in a South African prison. And I think around 93, I believe, is what they remember wholeheartedly. What's fascinating about this entire story of the Mandela Effect, and I have tested it several times. I was on this patio talking to a friend of mine 3,000 miles away. She'd never heard of it before. And so I said, it's interesting. I said, there's usually something that will resonate with you. And you won't believe Mandela Effect's real until you find the thing that turns you upside down. And it took 2 or 3 conversations, and then eventually, I forgot exactly which one it was for her. But all of a sudden, she was like, oh my God, that's ridiculous. It's got to be this other thing. And I think it had to do with the religious passage about laying down with the lion. And then all of a sudden it's, I think it is the lion now, or now it's the wolf. I mean, it's some weird thing. I wasn't aware of either before or after until I heard the Mandela Effect. But she was very religious. She recalled the churches that she had gone to, and it was this particular way. And then she looked it up online while we're on the telephone, and she's just, her mind's blown. So I would bet, regardless of where you are in the world, there are going to be Mandela Effects that you recognize. It is interesting how it settled down, though. As if man sort of found them all. The people who built the CERN Hadron Collider did conduct rituals in the basement that were extremely morbidly weird and cultish, putting movies like Eyes Wide Shut or towards the Mr. Rogers Show. They produced a gigantic sort of promotional commercial, if you could call it that, and it was just full of all that Super Bowl symbolism. Just weird. Their symbol for the Hadron Collider is the god Shira, which is the god of destruction. Which, to me, it's like, okay, it's an interesting cultural pick for Europeans to pick what I think is more of a native Indian god, if I'm right? It's like kind of a guru god, but they are destroying protons, so I could see someone being sort of a historian, anthropologist, archaeologist kind of person. This place is definitely not shy of people who have done amazing things in their life. And so picking that as a singular thing doesn't blow me away that much. Plus, she usually is represented inside of a ring. And so, okay, that doesn't scare me much. But what's the most basic theory of this Hadron Collider? I watched tons of videos about this stuff, and everyone's saying it's responsible for this effect occurring. And the employees of the CERN Hadron Collider did some funny stuff with some weird movies that they made. Again, everything's really bizarre. It's almost like art student weird stuff, but kind of packed with occultism. I don't think that every single employee that works there or has worked there is into this cult thing. I just think that there's enough people doing weird stuff that it kind of pollutes the entire barrel of apples, if you know what I mean. But I remember I got some videos of a guy, holding a sign up to his chest saying, something like Mandela in 2013. It was 2013, I think, when they did this. And it was trying to assert in this video, which could be heavily edited to create the conspiracy, that they knew about this ahead of time and that the Mandela Effect was the story of Mandela was going to be affected by it. Well, I will say that there are things in my history of my life that absolutely, positively go against the grain of what is currently the truth today. In fact, I just watched the making of Star Wars series 4, 5, and 6 at my smoke lounge, and I heard James Earl Jones say the line, "Luke, I'm your father." And then they played the clip, and it says, "No, I'm your father." I've also heard Mark Hamill say in a Comic-Con imitating James Earl Jones, when asked to do the line, he says, "Luke, I'm your father." And it's not that line at all in the movie. But that's how most of us remember it. My teacher, Robert McKee, who teaches screenwriting, I've been to his class 3 times. It's in his book as well. But he acts that line out in class, and he says, "Luke, I'm your father." But you don't need to hear my experiences at this point. But the idea is that this machine is somehow ripping a dimensional rift between other dimensions and our dimensions, thus letting the other dimension leak into our dimension. Okay, I guess that's possible. But in having the conversation with him, we digress to some other things. And this has been something that's been sort of sifting up to me in sort of the truth bubble of the universe, because I ask these questions to the universe. I send out the SQL query to give me the data that I'm looking for. And I will tell you that we're going to mix in a little bit of some interesting stuff here, but I made an episode called Piezo Puppets, and it's going to be a part of this episode, and I will tell you that we're now technically finding out that that's exactly what is the goal of a drink they want everybody to take, right? But before we talk about how you would change everyone's mind into one direction, but then change reality in a different direction, right? So we assume, okay, prior to this being figured out, because if you think about it, the internet pretty much came online in full force by at least 1996, as I remember it. And this is where people started getting computers. Apple in 97 releases the iMac, I believe it was 97, 98. And everybody has this turnkey computer. Just plug it in the wall and you're ready to go. Your subscription to the internet's already ready for you to run. And no one figured this stuff out. Because all you would have to do to figure this out, to get the ball rolling before 2013, that somehow a region of the world had something globally misunderstood. It's not far-fetched to think that on one or two little items here or there. Again, like Americans don't have a lot of common knowledge about the royal family of England because we weren't raised in England. We don't know who came before Queen Elizabeth. We just don't know. until somebody tells us. Either your parents told you because you're from England, or you just happen to take a class in college, or it's just something you're inquisitive about. Because before shows came out, like The Crown and stuff, back in the 80s and 90s, you had to have a teacher in school teach you things. But now, what if someone is thinking that Nelson Mandela died in 1993, and what you're telling me is what has to be the case, 100%. And I've met the people that believe he died in 93. That means that for 20 years, they never saw that man on television when he was freed from prison and then gains freedom and then dies. They never saw any of that occur because they would have said, oh my God, how's this guy still alive? Then years pass and then he dies. I thought that guy was dead. Now that happens every once in a while with actors, but typically they're pretty old. Or you get two people that look very similar with similar names, and then you kind of transpose. That's a little bit different than what we're talking about here. Again, what is the Mandela Effect? Don't worry about how it's done. What is it? How do you describe? Well, some people think it's this, some people think it's that. Well, let's go above that. Scientifically, if two scientists are going to describe this to somebody else, they have to say a gigantic segment of the population believes one thing and will wholeheartedly give you lamented experiences. They will describe it in as much detail as they possibly can, that they lived in a different reality than the one that someone else grew up in. And I'll just give you, I just said I wouldn't talk about mine. I want to emphasize the profound nature of some of this. When I learned that Eli Whitney created the cotton gin, I was told he was a black gentleman who picked cotton, and that's how he figured out how the sticks were used to roll cotton up on a stick off the cotton tree and then scoop it down into a bag and then go to the next one. And then he was watching other combine devices, and he realized, man, all we need to do is create something that scrapes, goes in a circle and scrapes this stuff and then can scrape it off, and then we got it. I was taught this in the first half of third grade in a country school out in southeast Kansas. And they said, this is what irony means. Irony means, isn't it amazing that the man that was tasked to pick cotton is now the guy that invents the solution? And so I'm staring at the ground. It's a profound moment that I am staring at the ground. I'm between all the chairs to my left. Everyone's walking out of the room for some reason. It's lunchtime. It's into school. I don't remember. The chalkboard, one of the blackboards is on my right, which is seldom used. The classroom, head of the classroom is behind me. I can just see it in my head. I can see the little tiny chairs for third graders, because we're just have tiny little butts, right? And I remember saying it to myself, irony, that's what irony is. And it was amazing in my mind, this story. That's how it was being taught to me. That's how it was taught to every friend that I know. But he's now a white guy from Yale. No irony whatsoever. How the hell a guy in Yale University, head of Skull and Bones, right, would even have the epiphany on how to build the machine in the South? It doesn't logically make any sense. The dude in the South who invents the device makes sense to me, right? So for me, that's a passionate, defining moment of my life. When I studied screenwriting and finally got professional training and professional mentoring, irony is a big thing. And I remember sitting in the chairs in 2007 to 2013, and I'm thinking about irony. And every time I hear the word irony, I'm thinking about that classroom moment. And it's no longer supposedly true. The moment happened, I can guarantee you, but the fact was supposedly misunderstood by my teachers. Well, the first two people I called on the telephone after learning this, from a listener comment, by the way, whoever you were, God bless you. First two people I call on the phone, I don't know, but I know he's black. I go to this laboratory where I was working at the time for LED technology, and I asked the two guys there, one 71 years old, one 58 years old. Both of them said, I don't know anything about him, but I know he was black. Boom. I've been to websites that you still celebrate him during Black Month, which is, or Black History Month, right? Which is February, right? February, March. Okay, so a big segment of the population was put under a spell or something, right? But what, if you think about it, like the television show Fringe, we have a part of the world that was sucked into this universe from the other one. But it's topic by topic differential, right? So you'll have other people that, so within the group of people that thought Eli Whitney was black, you'll have a subset that heard, "No, I'm your father," and a subset that says, "Luke, I'm your father." Very interesting. It's not like we're all exactly the same. Well, those are the people that believe A. We're the people that believe B. And it's a suite of ideas. It's a suite of things. Let's do a litmus test in the comments. I experienced Eli Whitney being a black gentleman. But I also experienced "Luke, I'm your father," not "No, I'm your father." So, and I believe Nelson Mandela died in 2013. So compare those three facts and see if you can scramble that. You believe he died in 2013, but you remember "No, I'm your father," and you remember Eli Whitney as a white guy, or any one of the other combinations. Let's see how close we are. Maybe there is a subset I'm unaware of. There was a lot of opportunists as well, creating clickbait online, taking things that were not Mandela effects and trying to create Mandela effects. For instance, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air original soundtrack had an extra verse. It wasn't congruent with the rest of the song, slowed things down. They ended up cutting that verse to tighten up the song. They also had a different beat in the first version that was submitted. So whoever had that content resubmitted it to the world and said it used to be this way. And I don't remember anyone saying, "Oh yeah, I remember it that way." That's most likely not a Mandela effect. I think the very first question you have to ask when you're trying to approach the idea of what could cause this is, what is reality? What is it? Is this really here right now? Are we really here right now? Are we a symbiotic soul, body, mind entity? Like I've said in several episodes, like I probably said in the episode I released before this one. Or are we simply imagining this reality? And as we adopt a paradigm of existence, we lose track of any other ability to be anything else but what we are right now. And therefore, we lose access to our previous form. Now, that is a broad stroke definition of what the reality might be, meaning if we are pure soul beings before we became physical, but somehow this idea of being physical sort of occurs to us, maybe out of straight boredom, maybe someone mistakenly does a little bit of movement as a soul and comes up with this matter-based sort of little tick, and then they massage it up, and they're using this ethereal dust that exists. They finally start creating some sort of environment that they can then exist in, and the first thing that they are is the tiniest little amoeba, because they just are still just trying to push a little bit of their soul into some other being to control it. And eventually, through practice, through infinity, they end up pushing more and more of their consciousness into this thing. Never at any point pushing the majority of their consciousness down inside mass, because it's probably impossible. It could be, even though, that we're a synaptic cell of a gigantic tree of consciousness that is God. That we are all just a little branch, a little leaf, a little fractal stem of it, right? So the more that we dose this stuff with our existence, we eventually come up with sort of this biped hominid thing, maybe even a primate. But then we go into hominids, then we're like, hey, we're kind of bored of that one. Let's not make that one anymore. Let's make Homo sapien. We get a redesigned skeleton, head to toe, redesigned phonetical chambers in our skull so we can articulate syllables and emphases, right? But at all times, there is a relationship between our body and our soul. There's a mechanism, a physical mechanism to push our soul into this world. Through the pineal gland, through the brain stems. It's the last episode, right? It's going to be a beautiful precursor to this episode. CERN Hadron Collider. Well, the theory is that it's banging two protons together. Maybe it does. I'm sure it does. I mean, that'd be a lot of people in on a conspiracy that it's doing nothing, right? But let me ask you a question. Do you think they could bang two protons together and have that experiment be pretty legit? Going after a bunch of like absolute dogma, looking for the Big Bang, looking for just absolute bullshit that we don't care about anymore. Any modern scientist who says they believe in the Big Bang is lost. They're trying to read their way into smartness instead of discovering their way into brilliance, right? But this energy wave is going around in this gigantic circle. As I understand it, as it closes in on the smaller sixes inside, it's getting faster and faster and faster, as everything does in a vortex. As it spirals down the vortex, it gets faster. I don't think it's a gigantic epiphany if I told you you're a frequency-based being. But what does that mean? What does that mean, at least in the ethereal sense of things? Well, in one realm, it doesn't even matter that you're a vibrational being. It doesn't matter. I don't believe string theory is remotely correct. I believe what we are is a three-dimensional matrix of these little particles that bang into each other. Somehow we have a container that contains a finite amount of these particles, although extremely dense. But as they collide together, they create spheres. They create bigger spheres and bigger spheres and bigger spheres until you can actually recognize something as what you might call a quark, a proton, a neutron. I'd say electron, but electron is sort of the combination of two different paths of ether banging into each other. Technically speaking, I guess you could designate it as a particle. I think there are other structures in the universe that are far more particle-like. But when the dielectric wave ricochets off the interior or the exterior of a cell, of a particle like a proton or a neutron, and it's basically bouncing away from this center cluster in the center, and it gets caught up with the magnetic wave that's also orbiting this thing because of all the negative pressures created by collision. When those two hit each other, they create a specific spin, just like when you pull your hand through water and you can see a bunch of little currents in the pool, or you look down into a river and you can see all those little currents, those little whirlpools that come and go right before your very eyes. You're watching how the universe works, except you're watching it in a two-dimensional plane that's being yanked down. Take away that push down, the gravity does, and I did say push because that's the correct vector. Things turn in spheres. Those little whirlpools, those little tornadoes, if you didn't have any force pushing them down, they would turn in spheres. Oh, that's what electron is. And because the ricochet is happening three-dimensionally away from any type of cluster of atoms that are in the center, aka clusters of ether, and the orbital magnetic wave is always around that because it's due to negative pressure orbiting. It's really probably just passing by half the time. It's got this cloud that is the electron cloud, far smaller than the stuff that's being bounced off of by the dielectric wave. I once had it described if you had two grapefruit on the home plate of the average baseball stadium, the electron cloud would be just on the edge of the stadium, about the size of a BB. I don't know if that's true. Sounds cool, doesn't it? So why go into that little digression in how ether works? Because it's going to be the foundation of any answer that we come up with. You are being renewed every split second, every nanosecond of your existence. Every single particle that you have borrowed to create your physical form is circulating. It's potentially going in you and draining out of you. If it's stuck in an orbit inside of you, it can orbit its way out. Things replenish. There's a pull to all things, right? So either one of two things is probably occurring if this is truly something that is real. It could be not real. I don't know how to explain it, but it could be just a misunderstanding of all of our educational process, and the internet eventually hit critical mass and the cogwheels went click and we all got on the same page with whether or not it's Berenstain Bears or Berenstain Bears. Could be a psyop that's merely testing us, but I tell you what, It could be that they shifted history as well, just because Wikipedia is out there and they just change something just to see if anybody notices. And then a bunch of people who don't remember say that they remember it the way it was written down because they're cowards. And the rest of us remember it and go, no, that's not the way it was. Oh, I'm always right. So that was the way it was. Who knows, right? Don't mean to insult anybody. I'm just going after every angle. But either the CERN Hadron Collider, through this orbital mechanism, this sort of vortex acceleration, is either truly ripping a hole in reality, which we have to then account for. You can't just say those words and go, man, it's just ripping the hole, and, time travel and Project Looking Glass, and all that stuff. You can't just say that stupid shit and walk away. You sound like an idiot. Well, what do you mean? Okay, let's just parse this so you understand why it's important to get things explained. If I'm Eli Whitney's a black guy version of myself in the United States of America, on the continent of North America, but my neighbor thinks it's a white guy from Yale, supposedly knows that theory. Okay, great. Then what would have had to have occurred if this particle accelerator that's way over in Europe, what would have had to have accomplished to checker this change across the United States? It's not like everybody in California thinks he's a black guy and then everybody in Arizona thinks he's a white guy, or some regional sort of amoeba on the surface of the earth where, okay, these people think it's Berenstain and these people think it's Berenstain. It seems to be intermittent. Well, if you're going to talk about ripping a dimensional thing in reality, okay, then somehow the one version of me, if there's a version of me that believes that Eli Whitney's a black guy because it's something that's educated, potentially there should be a version of me that believes he was a white guy as well. And that would mean in your dimensional ripping theory, the version of me who thought he was white went to the world where he was black. And now that dude's saying, I remember he was white and now he's black. And I came the other way and it was intermittent. So what is reality? Am I a soul? Am I just a bag of chemicals? Well, either way, the chemical configuration in the brain that thought one way has to go to the other dimension, and the other chemical configuration has to come to me. But if it's soul-based, somehow there's a vibration that's created where, as a crude analogy, imagine that you have a balcony in Europe, in Paris or something, very narrow street. I know England has some of these, but in Europe's got even more densely packed cobblestone roads, right? And you're standing on a balcony, but you're only about 15 feet away from the guy across from you. He's staring at you, you're staring at him. But in this particular case, that's reality A, and I'm in reality B. And they resonate. Okay. This is a bad analogy, but it'll get you where you need to be. They're resonating both our realities. So all of a sudden, the balconies start resonating, start moving physically towards each other. His balcony is coming so halfway towards me, and mine's coming halfway towards him. And then we suddenly also realize that our balconies are colliding, but they're not colliding as an impact. They're coexisting in some fourth dimensional thing, meaning matter can exist in the same time and space at the exact same time. And eventually he and I reach out our hands, like in some movie, and we can touch each other, but we can't feel each other. My hand is inside his hand, but it's not destroying his hand, and vice versa. His hand isn't destroying mine. And eventually our bodies start to absolutely coexist. And of course, the true analogy would be he and I are standing on the same balcony in different worlds, and the only thing that's going on is we're being resonated almost like a transporter from Star Trek, and two of us are on top of each other at the same time. Thus allowing, probably not the chemical bag to exchange configurations, because he could have an injury that I don't have, right? But our souls, that might exist in two different realms. We don't know how that exactly could work, but they start to reconnect the wrong way. My soul connects to his body, his soul connects to my body, and the history, the infinitesimal difference in history goes along with the calming down of the frequency. As the accelerator calms down, that vibration stops and we pull apart from each other. And now we've swapped places. We're 99.99999% the same, except for Eli Whitney and Star Wars. But who knows? Maybe he thinks Mandela died in 93, and I don't. So that is your dimensional rift sort of theory. No one talks about the details. It blows my mind how these videos will go on for 3 hours talking about it, and no one gets down to the nitty-gritty of their own assertions that this Hadron Collider is ripping apart reality. At the same time this thing is happening, we have to acknowledge the fact, too, that we didn't get new mountains in this world, right? The fabric of this planet didn't change, right? I remember New Zealand being to the west of Australia. It is to the east of Australia in the world I'm in. And what's interesting is somebody actually said or I think I saw a video where there was New Zealand on the west side of this continent of Australia. There's a gentleman in Australia said that he went to, I think it's Perth, which is a city, I hope I got that right. There's a major city on the west coast of Australia, and he said that he flew to New Zealand as a child, and he went to that city because he had to bounce on a connecting flight to New Zealand. He said, why would I go to the west coast of my own country if I'm going to just jump across the river over to New Zealand? What is reality, man? And there's probably more geographical ones that I'm unaware of. That's the big one. Now, me not knowing where New Zealand is and getting that mistaken for me as an American citizen, having only been to Sydney in 2018 and not prior to this, making all my videos about the Mandela Effect, might just make sense. Well, you're a bumpkin from Kansas. What the hell do you know about Australia? And I'd have to say, not a lot. I saw Mad Max a few times. But someone in Australia? And why was it that I didn't realize where it was until a dude from Australia made a little video saying, hey guys, does anyone else remember this? The other one for me is that Ellis Island was in the Atlantic Ocean and not in the Pacific. That one I haven't heard anyone else move, but you let me know, right? So what other potential theory? And I said I was going to take you a place that you probably didn't think I was going to take you. Because dimensional riffing is exactly the only theory that I know that's been asserted. And that's probably just based on my limited binging on this subject matter 2 or 3 years ago, right? What's fascinating as a slight digression is that these amazing things occur and then they just fade away like it's just a fad that has to go away. I mean, like, well, yeah, whatever. Yeah, whatever. The world totally changed and there's a bunch of us that lost history to this other theory, and that, there's only a binary relationship for all Mandela effects. Isn't that weird? Like, I believe Mandela died in 2013. Other people believe he died in 1993. I believe Eli Whitney was a black guy. Now he's a white guy. What hasn't occurred to my knowledge, and you let me know because I've never heard of it, is a trifecta or more. Oh no, Eli Whitney was an Asian guy, right? Something like that. He was, I don't know. He was a gray alien. I don't know. No one has like these, Mandela died in 1998. No, Mandela died in 2005. You don't hear a gigantic group of people that are swapping this kind of stuff. And the interesting thing is there's a major species difference in the data that we haven't really acknowledged before I go off of my other theory. Let's take Mandela himself. In both scenarios, Mandela was born. In one scenario, he died early in jail. 1993, I think, is the date they say. Another reality, he died in 2013. But in the same situation, Mandela was born and just happened to have an accident in prison in 1993 in South Africa. For some people and other people, he lived his life all the way to the very end. But still, he was born. The difference for me with Eli Whitney having a completely different race is that we are talking about a very affluent white guy that goes to Yale. That's a completely different life. That's a completely different set of parents, completely different lineage. But he still maintains usually the same years of history right? That invention was created. Because you could say, well, hey, if your guy didn't invent the cotton gin, then someone else would have, and it just would have been a different person. It could have been anybody, right? Except the dates still hold true to the dates that I remember, the Black Eli Whitney. The line in Star Wars changing isn't that intense because it simply could have been in one universe, George Lucas wrote it one way and then changed his mind, and the other way he kept his first impression. So James Earl Jones comes from the world where it was his first impression, Luke, I'm your father, and now we have the revised line that was acted differently, right? But isn't it strange, the dude that said one of the most infamous lines in movie history, other than, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn, from Gone with the Wind, I don't know of any other line. James Cagney had a few big ones. Since Star Wars, we've had very famous lines. I mean, there's famous lines in all movies. I don't want to be ignorant about that, but this is one of the biggest ones in history. A sequel that rewrote both movies when one closing line 10 minutes before credits are going to roll. Mind-blowingly awesome, right? It's significant, and James Earl Jones doesn't remember what he said because it's in the movie. Like, his voice speaks the other line. But in post-interviews 10 years later, 20 years later, 30 years later, he doesn't remember what he said. And Mark Hamill also agrees with that other line. I mean, come on. Where's this coming from? Oh, it's just pop culture getting it wrong. What, because pop culture didn't like Star Wars? Everyone got it wrong? No one's seen a mistaken so far. The Gone with the Wind line in history, they never got it different, right? Now, Casablanca has a sort of a Mandela Effect where Play It Again, Sam is what a bunch of people remember, and Play It Again is the way it's currently in the movie today. For me, Play It Again, Sam just sounds cool. Okay. So that's a little anomaly in some of the data. Some of it's a massive change, and some of it is a tiny tinkering of a change. Anne Rice, interview with a vampire, interview with the vampire, highly contested. There's 20 years of interviews about that book, about that movie, and everybody remembers, everybody in the clips today even says it differently with the current title today. So what other theory could it be? Well, you have to ask yourself, what is reality? Ask yourself that until you think you have a decent answer to it. Because I think it's going to change the world. I think it's going to change you, who you believe runs the world and who doesn't run the world. We know that right now, in 2021, that we have a bunch of absolute robots on this planet that are simply told what is true, and they believe it, and they're told what to do, and they just do it. Unbelievable. Research nothing, know everything. That's the mantra of the lazy, entitled. And it's every political affiliation, every race on earth. Everybody's doing this. Then there's a few of us. And we hide in this little channel here, right? But what if your reality and my reality is nothing more than this perception that we have been indoctrinated into? We have been convinced that this is reality. We subscribe to it, even though we're saying, hey, within this particular physical reality that we've kind of found a way to be comfortable in, we think for ourselves, right? We think for ourselves. We keep saying that. And it's true. Within this little bubble of a paradigm of existence, we do think for ourselves to the best of our chemical ability, best of our soul, body, mind connection ability. But what if we're actually joking, or kidding ourselves, I should say, where we are actually completely drunk on this reality of which we could actually change if we could just perceive that we have the ability to change it? How many of you, and no one's going to admit this, if you admit this in the comments, God bless you, because I'm going to admit it right here. I'll give you two examples. Everyone's going to know the first one, and a bunch of people will know the second one, but a lot of people won't know the second one. Matrix, 1999. Neo goes in to meet the Oracle, but before he's allowed to meet the Oracle, he meets the kid with the spoon. And the kid's holding up the spoon, and that little damn thing's doing a little dance, going, woo, woo. And Neo sits down, and he already knows about the Matrix, and he knows about being outside. He's got to go into the Matrix to meet the Oracle. And he sits down to the kid, and he's like, how do you do that? And the kid says, well, you don't try to bend the spoon. You try to build in reality around the spoon, man. It's something like that, right? Some inverse belief, but it actually makes you think for a split second. Oh, yeah. Okay, I see. Next example, I just recently saw this. There was an episode of Star Trek Voyager where Kes, the girl that only lives 9 years, Neelix's girlfriend, is starting to kind of sense that she's got something else going on, that she's got some abilities. She sits down with Tuvok, the Vulcan, and he is teaching her how to use her telekinetic capabilities, and the descriptions that he uses to teach her how to boil water inside this glass is to imagine the particles inside the glass and to simply excite them. Then she meets a mentor of her own race, and he says, well, if you want to drink it, just imagine that you're actually doing it, but don't do it. There's various fictional films that have tried to sort of tell you that the Force exists, like Star Wars. And regardless if you are 9 years old or 50 years old, every once in a while, the words sound so profoundly simple and logical that one thing occurs inside the mind. You realize that you have never sat down and attempted to do any of that. And so, the more open-minded you are, and the more that you've done things in your life that you never thought you could, you actually consider sitting down when no one else is looking and trying to telekinetically move something, try to create some sort of phenomenon. It's because you sense that potentially the only difference between you living in this reality and a better reality is that you haven't tried to alter your reality in any way, shape, or form. Like I said on the show, one of the most poetic moments about this day being 9/11's anniversary is that most of us can sense a gigantic shift in the world, that it was good. It was good down to the core, even with a lot of the gangster crap that was going on in the 90s in Los Angeles, which was just acidically horrible. It was infecting every town across the world, trying to imitate these criminals. As soon as that event happened, we experienced darkness, and not just because we could remember the horrific day and the senseless deaths and sacrifices that people put themselves in to save others. We perceive the world a different way for just, whatever amount of months it took us to get out of our PTSD, if we ever did. And then nothing grew back the same way. The rose never blossomed the way it used to. Now, for those of you who grew up on this side of the fence, I dearly apologize that you did not taste the 20th century, because it was I don't know, it was peppermint ice cream at times, man. I only have one friend that doesn't like mint. It was good. Had potential. Could have gone places. California was amazing when I moved here in 87, like I always say. But we lost that. So getting back to the Mandela, how does this relate? Well, one of the places where we know our mind-body-soul connection exists is in this chemical configuration of our brain that is the vessel that tries to attach to our soul, right? For any of you who have been parents of small children, or you've been around small children as a teacher or some sort of assistant, will know that there's some kids that are just born little bastards, man. From the day they're born, they're just ornery, weird kids, man. They have everything, or they have as much as their brothers and sisters. No one's picking on them, but they're just assholes. They just want to hurt animals, and it boils up until the point they're a black sheep that you never want to associate yourself with. It just happens. Sometimes you get a bad apple, man. Sometimes they're late bloomers, You see children's eyes, and you can tell that one of them has an old soul, and one of them has a very young soul. The young soul is very fragile very scared of all things, maybe built in a lumberjack body where they can actually bam everything to death. And then you have the 300-year-old elf that's born, and they're very calm and relaxed, and they think before they speak, and they're peaceful. Not that they can't defend themselves, but they'll wait till the last second before they react. Well, imagine that there's been a lot of actual exploration in exposing the cranium of a human being to electromagnetic frequencies, the sympathetic harmonies. Again, like I told you, the DoD in '67 had perfected and patented 7 different ways to change the state of a human being's mind by simply beaming electricity at the skull. Do you think they stopped using that, or do you think that was just a crossing, a beginning, an inception point to take that to the next level as a tool? When man discovered steel, okay, after all the other soft things that we had created, bronze and just melting down pure stuff, once we created steel and iron, did we just say, oh, we got steel and iron, okay, great, let's go on to the next thing? Hell no. We created cannons and guns and tanks and stuff that was weaponized with that technology. So you think they perfect talking to the human mind through the skull and just walked away from it? Remember Von Braun's assistant who said that I think she was in like the Chicago area or something like that, and Von Braun broadcast what she was supposed to say from some unknown source. She said, I stood on stage. He had told me to do this presentation, of which I wasn't qualified to do. He said he would tell me what to say. And I didn't know what that meant, but I trusted the man. So I went to this assembly. I stood up on stage, and before I know it, I can hear Von Braun talking to me in my head as if there was a telephone call going on. And Von Braun was bedridden in a hospital at the time. Okay. I mean, were the Nazis all freaking aliens? I don't know, man. But there's a bunch of technology rumored to exist that does exactly that. It's only audio. You don't have to exactly figure out how to do it. You just have to, how to configure all the little things in the brain, as long as you can copy what's in his brain and broadcast it to her. So electromagnetic frequencies and other perhaps frequencies. The electromagnetic frequency is a method of creating a frequency, and what wave you actually create it at, what frequency you create it at, amplitude you create it at, is completely configurable. And based on experimentation, serendipitous discovery, you might stumble onto a lot of stuff. But what if you were vigorously going after the results? This was 2013, people. Long after those rumored, projects. So they spin up this thing. And they just simply broadcast. They know it's going to broadcast around the world. Either it's a flat plane that's going out, it's a globe and it's going around. And it starts to resonate with some of us in some spectrums. They don't necessarily have to say, okay, we've figured out where Mandela died and we're going to pick that particular event and change people's minds. We're Berenstain. No, they don't have to do that. All they have to do is punch holes. But somehow, it looks as if there was only 2 realities that were involved in whatever occurred, because we only have binary Mandela effects. You either have A or B. I'm unaware of anyone saying a C. How could that be? Well, it could simply be that is the limitation of either the frequency or the amplitude. Probably the amplitude, to be honest. Frequency should control the penetration of the frequency, where amplitude would be going up and down and getting access to another reality to yank it down into you. It'd be interesting to discover. We won't be able to do this because the empirical data has not ever been stored that I know of. But imagine, that there was some physical attribute of people at the time they got yanked either way. I'll give you some silly examples. Some of us, potentially, who believe that Eli Whitney was a black guy, maybe we were asleep, or maybe we were awake, which means maybe we were lying down, maybe we were standing up, maybe we were having a pretty complex thought at the time that the accelerator fired. And so even though we were being manipulated, or maybe being more conscious and more awake and more coffeeed out made us have more of the effect, or maybe being relaxed and calm made us more susceptible to the change. I think the fastest way to change reality, and I mean physical reality, is to mess with the overall consciousness of humanity, to change everyone's mind about what is true. And then it simply becomes true. It physically becomes true. You can move New Zealand completely on the different continent side of Australia. Now let's loop back to my piezo puppet episode. If you haven't seen it, you should see it, because it's exactly what's going on right now in the world. So there's this drink that's getting real popular with some of the numbskulls in the world, right? Senselessly applying procedures to their body of which they know nothing about, trusting agencies that have never, ever once cared about their health, ever. Co-opted from the very beginning, because the very foundation of the science itself has always been the World Trade Organization's sort of Rockefeller attempt to genetically modify every human being on planet Earth. So there's been this discovery of a metal substance that just appears in this drink. The country of Japan has discovered this metal substance in the drink, and they suspended drinking. Okay? But it's in every single drink around the world, this stuff. And guess what? This metal is magnetic. It's subatomic, but it's at a subatomic level. It's also magnetic, but it's definitely like a nano-sized thing. And it's magnetic. It's so teeny tiny that when you look at the drink really close, it still looks transparent. It goes through the eye of a needle into your body. It is creating electromagnetic waves around your blood cells. Now you might think, if you see these images, and I put the video on deepthoughtsradio.com that you need to see under suggested videos. It's called Drink Ingredients. Go take a look at it. You can actually see this working. But I want to explain the physics of this, because a lot of people will look at these microscopic photos of red blood cells next to this stuff, and you'll be like, well, how the hell does a non-magnetic organic tissue get magnetically attracted to this stuff? I mean, my refrigerator magnet won't stick to my wood cabinet. How the hell's that working? I'll tell you. That's why it's important to study all forms of science, so that you don't get easily confused and easily convinced to harm yourself before you do a little bit of research, or maybe a whole bunch of research, man. I'm telling you, the videos I've produced on ethereal sciences, if we ever get anything back to normal, which we may never do, will prove out to be 100% correct. I guarantee you. Gravity. I just saw an episode about the fabled triangle craft. It was like the TR-38 something or other, right? It's the triangle aircraft that everyone thinks they've seen. Not to be confused with the Aurora, which has a conventional engine. Nope, the triangle craft has been patented, I think, in 2018, all of its mechanisms internally. Supposedly, it's using the Mercury centrifuge torus, which is like a donut, spinning it up and electrifying it, and it's creating this anti-gravity field around the vehicle. Again, I've had people visit Sid Mead before he passed and said, look, we're light years past that stuff. That's 1995 stuff. So even if they patent that, that just means they're going ahead and getting control of that old technology while probably implementing something much easier. But the Mercury is supposedly, just electrified using the isotope shedding of electron waves from atomic fuel. Makes sense. Whatever. You're just exacerbating the dielectric magnetic waves in the Mercury. But let's just say You wanted to know how this vehicle is zero gravity at some point. Well, if you want to talk to ethereal winds, you need to stir the winds with something that's controllable. So far, in the 21st century for mankind, the only disclosed methodology of controlling these, and it makes complete sense, is electromagnetic waves. 100%. If you wanted to control where water went, outside of its typical, flowing from a higher elevation to a lower elevation pressure, and just creating like a Panama Canal sort of chamber thing. If you wanted it to go uphill or circle up, where it's not supposed to be, you would have to do something to stir that up, right? So what these ships do is use a series of electromagnetic engines, which can create catalyzed fields where you're putting in very little energy, and as it coils up, it starts to expand its field to the point where there's so many electrons traveling around the vehicle that the very ether that would be pushing it down to the ground gets diverted around like stealth light technology, right? If I want to wear a stealth suit and be completely invisible to you, that means that as you look at me, the light that's hitting the back of my head has got to come around my face and go straight out to your face at the exact same angle. It would be as if I didn't exist. Same exact thing with this jet aircraft. For those that have you've seen the quantum locking puck on the Mobius strip, it's called quantum locking because when you freeze down this puck at a particular level, you have stabilized so much of the ethereal wind around that puck. And because you have you have just magnetic, I guess it could be electromagnetic as well, but you have magnets that are opposing each other. This creates a perfect quantum locking parlor trick. So you can push that thing around the Mobius strip, it goes upside down and right side up, and it sticks to it. Well, now imagine you force that to happen around an aircraft. That's how it becomes anti-gravity. Why am I going off on this in the middle of a Mandela episode? Well, there's a whole string of research that was done, confirmed, that says that if you have this metal inside your body, coursing around your veins, clumping your red blood cells together around this stuff, that they can shake that metal and control you. The reason why your red blood cells clump around this stuff is that this metal naturally exudes at a very subatomic level that's important to little tiny particles called blood cells. These poles, these electromagnetic poles, just like the one on your refrigerator, it embeds itself into the fabric of organic matter that's freed up. It'll probably stick to the walls too, this metal, at some little level, but there's a lot of action going on in your arteries, so it's going to get pushed around. But if suddenly you died, I guarantee you, if you open that body up, that stuff's going to be nailed against the walls of your artery just as much as it's got clumps of red blood cells around it. The other thing is when you expose this metal to a harmonic frequency, you'll see in this video, it grows in a petri dish. When you make this particular metal about half the size of a BB, and you put it inside a petri dish with a bunch of other ones, and you resonate it with electromagnetic frequencies, it grows like little veins. It finds itself, it finds other ones in it, and you actually see it's not even organic, man, but you will see it behave almost like a smart little worm, where the little tips will kind of go back and forth until it grabs the next little BB that's out there, and then that frequency gets pushed up through the chain of BBs until it gets to the end, and then that one's wiggling, waiting for something that can connect to some other strand's wall. It's exactly like electricity moves across the sky during a burst of lightning when it does that crawly thing, right? It's organic in nature because that is how plasma energy, aka the slowest moving ether you've ever seen, or the first stage of slow moving ether, right? As soon as you take ether down from 50 times the speed of light to the first visible speed, it's plasma. It's electricity. Keep slowing it down and it turns into your flesh. It turns into wood. It turns into things that won't shock you, right? Because it's not moving as fast. The entire planet is being convinced to dose themselves unknowingly with this little tiny nanometal. You're going to be dosed and dosed and dosed with this drink until the particle count inside your body is complete. It's hit critical mass inside your body. And until a bunch of it stores itself inside your brain cavity, exactly where they need to control what you think, what you feel. What could happen at that point? We're talking about the Mandela Effect and changing your perception of reality. Now, quite frankly, it's probably either going to go one way or another. It's probably going to just be zapped one day and you're all going to die. Who took that drink, if you take too many extra ones. And then you have just a threat that says, hey, I'm going to make you feel really bad. And they give you a headache, they give you migraines, they give you nausea, they make you crazy, make you look like a zombie. Act like a zombie. That's one of the things that they found at the DOD experiment in 1967. Now, I think what their zombie is really kind of laying in your sofa, drooling on yourself and not walking around trying to eat a brain. But let's take it up to a more sophisticated matrix of its implementation. As I suggested a little bit in the Piezo Puppet episode. If they know that they can hit you with a matrix, a lattice of frequency, meaning every three-dimensional point in space and within a cube is accounted for, like sort of when they take your MRI data, right? They're hitting several beams at the same time and trying to figure out, is that a bone? Is that an artery? We know the frequency of these different tissues. And so when we draw this digital voxel image of your body and show you the slices of your body, they can figure out what's going on. Well, imagine they do that on a neurological level. Let's say they want to talk to the outer surface of your brain. Well, they generally know the depth of a skull, the thickness of a skull. Then they would know how to hit you with a particular frequency in order to push through that skull, but not much further. And then you get one effect. But they want to get to, say, to your pineal gland. Say they wanted to fry your pineal gland. And they know that the pineal gland is a collection of tissues that resonate at a different frequency than other tissues. Say the gray matter cholesterol that's most of your brain is a completely different substance in the pineal gland. So they simply hit you with the frequency strong enough to penetrate your skull, get to that pineal gland, and make it explode. Let's say you brush your teeth with fluoride and you load up all that fluorine dust in your pineal gland. And then all they do is they pop that dust. That dust is the stuff they're going to actually boil inside your brain. Not so great, right? But now what if they've done research well beyond anything that you and I have discussed and well beyond anything that you and I know? That the very matrix of our perceived reality is accessible to them. But through experimentation, perhaps, big machine learning attached to the partial experimental results, they're able to deduce how to send you to hell, how to send you to heaven, how to burst you out of your body, push you away from this earth so you can't even come back by sending this sort of hadron collider thing into some huge loop. It's an extreme concept, of course. But why not visit it while we're here, What I think is interesting is the following. Because we are so hooked on digital devices to be entertained every split second, one of the side effects that no one really pays attention to is that being educated and learning things becomes far more difficult. Because learning things sometimes is difficult. The only exception is that you have somehow a synaptical configuration that is absolutely predisposed for a particular talent. Perhaps you're a musician, perhaps you're a mathematician, so it just comes to you much easier, which is probably the very few folks in society that actually learn something up to this PhD level, and you could participate in creating these machines and taking on far more covert things if you have a well-developed right brain as well as your left brain. That's what the military likes. You need both sides of your brain if you're truly going to be a head scientist. They hire B players who are just left-brainers to serve the A players to make sure they can compartmentalize them, keep them in the dark, etc. I think I've been telling you that a good friend of mine said he was going to start detoxing out of digital devices and digital information, such as the Pavlovian trigger for the red dot. You know, we make fun of cats for chasing lasers, right? And dogs do it too, but cats do it insanely, intensely. It's something that they just have to catch, this intangible sparkle. They are the shiny animals, right? Go see my episode called Shiny People. But the human red laser dot is the nap that's got a little notification color on it. It's inside our little games that we play. We're trained to go for the red dot. It's almost as if we can't do anything else until we get rid of the red dot. It's pathetic, right? We're all guilty of it, trust me. But once you start seeing that that little red dot is not exactly a positive but a negative, if you could truly just hear the elders of our world watch us look at those red dots, and they had a chance to whisper some intuition into our ear, they might say something like, stop chasing the devil. Stop chasing that thing that's robbing you of your entire life. Sure, you might have a little social experience with someone you don't even know online. But what about what you could be doing with your time if you stop chasing the red dot? Stop watching every single sports game that's out there. Get yourself an education. Why are these people building machines that can do all this crazy stuff potentially? We know that crazy machines are built. They're called weapons. How are they able to pull the wool over everyone in the entire world? The answer? Because we're all idiots, that's why. No one's interested in being educated anymore. To do your own research, man. It's interesting that when you watch a science fiction movie that does a really good job portraying, say, deep space travel, like Star Trek. Star Trek makes the universe feel large, and Star Wars makes it feel like they could go anywhere in the universe and get the Kessel Run done, right? And you can just be anywhere. Just hop in, right? When you research a particular subject matter, what is a fascinating correlation metaphorically is when I studied cosmology, I swear to God, every book that I read about the stars or anything that was, it's probably all bunk, but when I was reading about it, I felt like I was traveling through the stars, man. When I was reading, I had a whole book on quasars back in like 87. I got out of this book club, and I remember just reading about it, and I just felt like I was flying to that entity at the edge of space. That supposedly this entity is traveling away, according to its redshift, at twice the speed of light, even though they say you can't reach that, which again proves it's all BS, right? Okay, it's interesting. If you start studying, the protein patterns that generate your chromosomes, and you start getting into how they fold and what have you, now you're going down to the subatomic microscopic level, and you'll find that proteins fold faster than the speed of light, and you're like, okay, what's up with all these rules that say that these things can't exist? Let me ask you a question. Let's say you're obviously a professional in something, whatever that is, and then somebody tries to tell a line of BS in the room. And it just so happens it's in your line of work. They're trying to tell you how firefighters fight fires, how police officers apprehend people, how a sniper shoots a sniper rifle, or whatever. And you just happen to be a firefighter, a policeman, or a sniper from the military. And you can tell the person who's talking doesn't know anything about what they're talking about. And they're misleading everyone in the room. Perhaps they have a little angle on a story that makes everyone else go, oh, wow, really? And then you kind of go, well, unfortunately, you're talking about what I do, and none of that's true. Let me explain to the rest of the people that just got conned how much of a douchebag this guy across the room is, and you just lay down the story and you correct everything so everybody goes away with at least an accurate representation of things, right? That's how you need to be if this stuff scares you. If medicine scares you, you need to get educated super duper fast and go way deeper than just watching videos from somebody. Get a book, get, controversial research. I mean, whatever you got to do. If you want to disprove that space exists, well, go get in all your cosmology books, rip apart their theories. I mean, Big Bang's a great place to start tearing things down. Finding out that gravity is a phenomenon in Wikipedia instead of an actual scientific fact, because they got the polarities different. Telling you ether doesn't exist, but they understand how everything works in the universe. I mean, it's a joke. And there's a lot of brilliant people in the past who knew how things worked, and they've been marginalized. Go rediscover their materials. Find experts in their writings. It'll change everything. If you want to understand Tesla, you have to become an electrical engineer. You do. You have to figure out how old tube radios work from the 30s. You should probably learn the difference between AC and DC. You have to do these things. If you want to study physics, you're going to have to go back to Newtonian physics. You're going to have to figure out ethereal physics, which is Faraday through Tesla, and then find the fraud of Einstein. Go watch my episode on Einstein. It'll shock you, man, what a fraud that dude was. He was assigned to erase science and to get us absolutely drunk on crap. He invented nothing that's making this show occur right now. When Tesla invented everything, it's making this show occur right now. So when they build machines like Hadron Colliders, you need to be able to smell the bullshit of the Higgs boson particle, which, by the way, was supposed to be either multiverse or singleverse. And they said it came in exactly between the two theoretical frequencies that these two fossil scientists came up with. There's two young kids representing the fossils, but it was a joke that we were just reaching for straws. And when they said they found it, it was like one kid said, I think it's 26.5 on the FM radio. And the other guy's going, I think it's 106.7. And then, of course, it's directly in between. And I mean, down to the absolute microfrequency. Absolute laughable joke. And now it's starting to get embedded in videos. In fact, if you watch the video that I saw about the triangle aircraft, he mentions the Higgs boson particle as part of the theory about how this aircraft works. It's just like, that's how they do it, man. They smuggle it in so that it sounds familiar. Oh yeah, I know about that. I'm an authority, and total crap. Because I haven't done any of my own research to figure out this is all bullshit. And then you're going to have to be logical, like a Vulcan, man. So my summation about this Mandela Effect is, remember, unless someone says something different, all of the effects are binary. It's one way or the other. There's not a third result. That's bizarre. That is really bizarre. It's intermittent among the population that remembers it one way or the other. I don't know if anyone's done any like regional metrics on it, but you'd have to ask a bunch of people. Where do you live? Where'd you grow up? What schools did you go to? And find out, okay, oh, wow, it's interesting. All the schools in the Midwest thought that Eli Whitney was black. Oh, except my friends who've been raised in California also believe the same thing, Is it an American thing versus a European thing? Like, what's the deal? Why wouldn't America know its own history? How does everybody who believed that Mandela died in 93 not see a single story about that guy for another 20 years to realize they were wrong? They need the Hadron Collider to suddenly realize that this thing is messed up. You see how inefficient the episodes about Mandela Effect go. Even my episodes in the past weren't as efficient as it's taken me 3 years to think it through. And then a friend posing the question to make me go, oh yeah, there are some unresolved things. And just remember, once your brain acquires a mystery, one of the most beautiful things about the soul-body-mind connection is that you have a lot more processors going on than you're aware of. You know how when you sleep your computer these days, it's still awake talking to the internet and giving away all your information to Tim Cook so he can erase it on your computer with his CMOS security update? That's what your soul's doing. It's waking up. It continues going and it continues working. And it's got a library, man. It's got a library of every magic trick that's ever been done. It knows the true history of the universe, at least as it applies to your plane of existence. And so you're constantly getting this information. But the only requirement that has to come with the answer is you asking the question. The more specific you ask the question to the universe, in my experience, you get an absolutely complete response. Which is why it's really good to debate all these things with other people, because other people require more than you do almost inherently. Even if you're thinking, hey, I've got 20 things on the Mandela Effect that I constantly consider, and some other person walks up to you, they don't have any of the 20 that you have, but they've got the 21st one. Well, what about this? And you're like, oh, that's another one. Holy crap. And then all of a sudden, that one little thing is the puzzle piece you were missing. And all of a sudden, man, you start putting that puzzle together, pulling that thread out of the sweater, and you get the complete answer. It's like every movie you've ever seen where someone is trying to decipher something in a hurry. And that one thing clicks. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments. I'd really be interested if you are affected by the Mandela Effect. Tell me which ones got you. Tell me if you've ever heard of a C to the AB options that I've heard of. And if you haven't discovered your Mandela Effect, I guarantee you have one. Guarantee. Go get the list. Check it out. There's a lot of bogus ones out there, but last time I did a run on this, which is probably a couple of years ago, there were overwhelmingly 85, 90% real Mandela Effects and maybe 5 to 10%, bogus ones, but it kind of grows and shrinks because they get dispelled, and so they kind of get out of the lexicon of the effect. And if you dig this kind of stuff, definitely go to deepthoughtsradio.com. Just search on Mandela Effect. You'll find it. I don't know if I put a category together for that or not, but just look up effect and you'll find the other ones. On the website, we have everything you need: video, audio, social media, all new remastered season 1, a store with some fun shirts on it. For those of you that support me through PayPal and Patreon, thank you so much. You make the show happen. Again, you get in the credits. You get the shows before everybody else. And I love you extra much. Anyway, take care of yourself and someone else. And I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.